My name is Tom Fox, and together with my friend and colleague Sam Silverstein, we are here to talk to you about an interesting development from the regulators in the United States. And those regulators are in the form of the U.S. Department of Justice. And what they have done is talked about culture and data analytics in a way they never have. They did so through a document entitled the 2024 Update to the Evaluation of Corporate Compliance Programs, or the 2024 ECCP. The evaluation of corporate compliance programs was first issued in 2017. We've had 4 updates since then, and this is the document that prosecutors use when assessing a company that finds itself in a compliance action, in an integrity action, in an FCPA action, in some action in front of the regulators, either criminally or civilly. So it's an incredibly important document, but for all of us on this call and this webinar, it gives us a direct line into the mind of the prosecutor and what the Department of Justice wants to see in a compliance program. So this was released in September, and so it's the very latest DOJ thinking. The way the ECCP is laid out, and we'll go into that around culture in a later slide, it's a series of questions. It started out simply with about 44 questions. Those questions have now expanded to about 250, and they give us great insight. And more importantly, it allows you to benchmark your own compliance program against a standard, a set standard, so that if you ever find yourself in an investigation, you will know exactly what will be expected of you. This is the very first instance of documentation. Now, this is not the first instance where the regulators have talked about culture being important, and Sam's been talking about that for years. But this is the first instance where we've seen the regulators say, we want to see your numbers. We want to see your documentation. We want to see your data analytics. We want to see it around culture, engagement, and trust. And Sam and I both believe that the culture audit is perhaps the most uniquely situated product, software tool rather, that will not only give you the information to improve your culture and assess it, but exactly answer what the DOJ is telling us in terms of documentation around culture, engagement, and trust. So these are some of the questions the Department of Justice asked in the 2024 ECCP. What insights can be taken from the management of a company's hotline that provide indicia of its compliance culture or its management of hotline reports? Now, obviously, the specifics of your hotline or investigative protocol are a critical part of your hotline. But look at the first clause there. What insights can be taken from your management of your company's hotline? That's exactly what the culture audit is designed to assess. What information can be taken? 2, prosecutors also assess how the company has leveraged that data to gain insights into the effectiveness of its compliance program, sought to promote an organizational culture that encourages ethical conduct and a commitment. So, how has the company leveraged data? And Sam's going to go through some fabulous examples of specific data the culture audit gives you. We have talked about this at length in prior webinars, but we've always focused on how do you use it. Here, we're going to be able to show you how the data that the culture audit provides exactly responds to what the DOJ want. And once again, this is the first instance where the DOJ has said we want documentation around culture, engagement, and trust. There is a series, as I mentioned, the ECCP is built around a series of questions that prosecutors will ask you if you find yourself in an investigation or across the table from the regulators. And under the section entitled A Culture of Compliance, there are these 4 direct questions. And I'm going to read them out because these are the most important questions around culture in the ECCP. How often does the company measure its culture of compliance? 2, how does the company's hiring and incentive structure reinforce its commitment to ethical culture? 3, does the company seek input from all levels of employees to determine whether they perceive senior and middle management's commitment to compliance? And 4, what steps has the company taken in response to its measurement of the compliance culture? Sam and I strongly believe that the culture audit will give you a basis to answer every one of these and have a discussion with the Department of Justice that will lead to hopefully a significant reduction in any penalty that they may be thinking about assessing to you, because it directly answers these questions and more. And Sam, I really want to pitch it over to you and start with question number 2. How does the company's hiring and incentive structure reinforce its commitment to an ethical culture? And then maybe explain how the culture audit directly answers the rest of these questions.
Thank you, Tom. I think it's important that we talk about the DOJ and what happens if we're facing a prosecutor. To me, the goal is to never be in that position. And if leaders in an organization create the belief that culture is their primary responsibility, creating and protecting a sustainable, high-performance culture that is built around ethics and compliance, then for the most part, you should never have to deal with the DOJ. You shouldn't be in a position to where this is going to become an issue. But it does become an issue, and you need to protect yourself. And all of this dovetails in together. So let's go to number 2, which you mentioned. How does company hiring and incentive structure? A culture of an organization is defined by the values of that organization. I'm not talking about the printed values. I'm not talking about the values on the website or the values on the wall, but the values that are lived. And so when leadership in an organization wants to create an organization where ethics and compliance is incredibly high, that has to be sewn into the lived values of the organization. And then what's imperative, Tom, is that we hire to and fire from those values. The entire hiring process should be built around evaluating whether or not an individual has the seeds of the organization's values in them. Because if the seeds are there, as a leader, we can bring them out. We can nurture them. We can water them. We can feed them. And we can help people be the best that they can be. But if those seeds aren't there, then they're not going to be a good fit. Now, they may have the skill set you want. They may have the ability to do tasks, but if they're not going to live those values that are connected to ethics, compliance, and the other positive values that need to be in place in an organization, it doesn't matter how good they do their job, because quite frankly, they're always going to put you in a situation where your culture is going to be less than. And so it really does start with the hiring and the firing, meaning if someone's not living the values and you allow them to stay in your organization, then you're creating an environment where the culture will deteriorate and where this culture is going to be brought down. So hiring is important, evaluating people early on, because you want to hire slow and fire fast, which means if someone that you hire does in that period of time right afterwards, you need to have a great evaluation, because it's always easier to correct a mistake early on than it is a year, 2 years, 3 years down the line. Now, the whole idea behind the culture audit is to measure what's going on inside of an organization and having the analytical data that we need to make critical decisions and to thrive at our very best. And that's number 1, is measuring it. And you know what? A lot of companies do an engagement survey or something like that. And engagement's great and engagement's important, but it's just a small piece of the pie. It's really critical that we have a very detailed culture audit that tells us absolutely everything that's going on in the culture, so we know where our strengths are, we know where our weaknesses are, and then because we sincerely do care about our people and our culture, we now have the information we need to make the decisions that we need to make. One of the things, if you look down at number 3, does the company seek input from all levels of employees? The culture audit is designed to do just that. It's not just about surveying the senior leadership, mid-level, frontline. We want to hear from everyone, because the best data is always going to be a broad cross-section of the entire organization. And remember, the data that we're looking at is what people think looking back over their shoulder. In other words, how am I being treated by my direct supervisors, by the people above me and the people above them? Because those are the people I come in contact with. So if you don't go all the way down to the front line, you're not going to get that full backward view up the ladder of everyone in the organization. And since culture flows from the top down, you need to measure from the bottom up all the way to the top. And then, quite frankly, what are you doing with the information and data that you have? And that's what steps has the company taken? What are you doing with that information? What decisions are you making? What holes have you found that you figured out how to plug, how to fix, how to make better? And when you have the right data and you look at these 4 points, Tom, then you're able to make decisions and you're able to, if you do end up in that situation where you're across the table from a DOJ prosecutor, you're able to address these issues and hopefully put yourself in a good light.
Sam, we've already had a question come in, and let me just pitch it to you now. In a global organization, how should you integrate the data from the culture audit with transaction data to identify red flags?
So what would be an example of the transaction data?
Right. Typically, you might have a third party distributor or sales agent making a sale for you. Is there a way to integrate culture data with transactional data, whether it be an external third party or an internal third party? And let me perhaps even further define it. Say it's an internal employee, you're going to have data on their GTE spend, make sure it's within the parameters you've set. You're going to have data on any monies that they may have utilized for advertising, marketing, or those types of expenses. That in and of itself could raise a red flag. But now you've got the ability to assess culture. Can you use the culture audit or data from the culture audit in a way that might integrate with what an employee might be spending or what you're seeing from a third party's actions on your behalf?
Absolutely. And that's what's key is, and I know that we had planned on talking about this, but data is going to come at you from multiple sources. Not only do we have the data, the culture audit, you have the anecdotal data, you have what you see, you have what you're hearing from third parties. Where does all this intersect? And how are you as a leader in the organization treating that and making it important enough to where you're making decisions based on that data? Now, you define your culture. If at any point someone's not living that culture, then it's leadership's responsibility to deal with that. And so you're gonna discover that through the audit. And look, the bigger the company is, the bigger the organization, the smaller we need to chunk it down. If you're a company with 150 people, you can do an audit on the whole company. If you're a company with 50,000 employees or 150,000 employees, then not only is it important to have data on the organization as a whole, but that data is going to be broken down into regions or districts or smaller areas, because the last thing we would want is a positive data from one area offsetting data from another area and then making us think that the situation's better than it is. But the organization's culture is going to be felt outside of those four walls. So should there be a third party, should there be a supplier or customer that provides some sort of feedback? That's critical, because if someone's not doing something right and it's impacting that third party, we certainly want to know that. I believe that a lot of that will show up in the culture audit, but I certainly want to keep my ears and eyes open to any and all parties, because it's the intersection of all that data that becomes the ultimate resource.
Sam, I'd like to focus your attention on question number 3, because the Department of Justice has another phrase they use and have used, which is literally from the boardroom to the shop floor. And that's what they want to see in terms of engagement. That's what they want to see in terms of culture. That's what they want to see in terms of communication. Why is it so important, even if the DOJ had not said, that you assess literally either to or from the shop floor up?
Well, we've been doing this for years, Tom, long before the DOJ even got involved to the degree of talking about the importance and relevance of culture. The senior leadership sees things one way. That's just how they see it. And the front line, the shop floor, may see things differently. if I'm a leader that really cares, I need to know if there's a difference, if there's a delta between how you see it and how I see it. Because if there is, then there's a problem. It's what's communicated, it's what's felt, it's what's real to them. How I see the culture as the senior leader doesn't really matter if that's not translating down to the shop floor. So if I'm not willing to get on the shop floor and find out what's going on, then how can I make sure that this amazing culture that the leadership team envisions is actually a reality? And so we want to make sure that the dream and the reality are the same. And they can be, but only if you're out there hands-on. With Boeing and everything, all the challenges that they have, the new CEO has pushed everything out to the shop floor. That's where he wants to be, because that's where everything is implemented. That's where the decisions are being made in real time. That's where the results are showing up. And so if you really want to know what's going on in your culture, you have to measure it on the shop floor.
Sam, we've had another question come in, and I think it's going to be interesting to hear your answer, even if I think I might know what it is. And the question is, if only 50% of our sales team has completed the anti-bribery, anti-corruption training, should my logic take that low rate of completion into account to identify risky transactions, risky countries, and I even want to throw in risky employees?
Absolutely. It's like only half the people are trained to do something. The other half, why would you expect that they're going to do it right? Whether it's the ABAC or whether it's trained on how to use a piece of equipment. If I have a piece of equipment out here that has safety issues, I'm only going to train half my employees on safety. I'm going to let half the employees who haven't completed the training on safety get onto the production flow and be at possible harm. So I think this comes back to leadership. We have the ability to say all or nothing. It's the same way with the values. You have the ability to say these are our values. Live them or not. If you don't, that's okay, but we'll allow you to go to some organization where that kind of behavior is acceptable.
Sam, I'm going to go to the next slide, which I've entitled The Culture Audit as a Data Tool. And as I said a little bit earlier, you and I have both talked about the culture audit as a way for companies to take away actionable items and then implement. But here, the Department of Justice has really focused on the data. I wanted to put forth three things for your consideration and our listeners' consideration. Number one, the culture audit allows you to identify areas for remediation. Two, it allows you to benchmark your progress going forward. And then three, everyone who has ever heard me talk has heard me say the following. The three most important things about any compliance program are the following: document. The reason is if you don't document it in a regulator's eyes, it never happened. So I'd like to ask you to talk about the culture audit as how they answer or respond to these 3 points.
Again, here's the thing. A culture connects to the bottom line. We know this. It's proven. If you make the time and spend the energy to create an amazing culture, you're going to attract better people. You're going to retain better people. Productivity goes up. Profitability goes up. Engagement goes up. Everything works. If your culture lacks, I'll use a kind word, if your culture lacks, the bottom line is also going to lack. And so is your position with the DOJ, because things are going to go afoul. The whole idea behind the culture audit, yes, the culture audit in itself, if you're utilizing this tool on an annual or semi-annual basis, in and among itself, it's the document. You've documented the information. Now, the next side is it's also put a stake in the ground. It's your benchmark of where you are, and it shows how you've improved since the last time you took it. And it could show how you haven't improved. And if that's the case, then it's simple math. And you realize you're not doing what you should be doing with the data and making the changes you need to make the improvements. And so sometimes leadership gets so involved in the tactical side of the business and it's all about production. It's all about delivery of the goods and services. It's all about the sales. You need to spend at least as much time on the relational side of the business. And the relational side of the business is going to be the culture, and the culture audit is going to tell you exactly where you are, where you've been, and it's going to lay out a path for where you want to go. And once you have those three things, you just need to do what you should be doing. And if you're doing that, you're going to take where you've been, you're going to improve in that situation, you're going to document the path. You'll be better 6 months than you are now. You might not be the ultimate destination, but you're moving in the right direction. And that's what's critical. Momentum in the right direction.
Sam, beginning with this slide and for the next few slides, we've got a title, and I really want your thoughts on how the culture audit will help in a variety of different ways. And I'm going to start with employee engagement.
So things that we're looking at in employee engagement is employee feedback. Are they involved? Are we tracking the data from feedback, which can give us the insights into their sentiment about their work environment and leadership? If employees are sharing their feedback, that's a positive thing, but are we tracking it? And then participation in training programs. What's the data on employee participation in compliance training? We had that question that came in, 50%. If we're at 50%, I'm kind of concerned about it in a situation that should be 100%. What about voluntary programs? All this offers insights into how engaged employees are with the company's compliance initiatives. Now, remember, we want to create a culture in the first place that takes ethics and compliance off the table, meaning, of course, this is how we do it. Why would we do it any other way? And I believe you can get there. And then there's the use of corporate tools and the data on the use of internal systems like hotlines, whistleblower portals, and internal messaging boards is going to help assess whether employees feel empowered to engage with compliance resources. Remember, Tom, if we build a culture that values people, where people feel appreciated, where people feel heard, then they're naturally going to want to engage with these tools and resources, which means that's more information flowing upstream. And information is the king. That's how we make decisions. Now, the key is when something comes in that's negative, what are we doing with it? Are we sweeping it under the rug, or do we genuinely care and want to make it better?
Okay, trust. You have talked to us for a long time about trust, but how does the culture audit not simply help you assess your trust and give you ideas about how to improve it, but give you, once again, that documented data that you can present to the regulators if you need to?
So trust comes, I love it when a leader says you have to earn my trust, because I know that leader doesn't get it and they have it totally backwards. The leader's the one that has to earn the trust. If you don't trust me, why would you hire me? So the leader has to earn the trust of the people, and the leader earns the trust of the people, not through mandating it, but literally through their real actions. And that shows whether or not they deserve that trust. You look at whistleblower reporting. The data on the number of whistleblower reports can be telling, because a lack of reports may not necessarily mean a lack of issues. There might be a lack of trust that someone's going to listen or someone's going to respond. And there could be the fear of retaliation or distrust. So that's important. Retention rates in high-risk areas, monitoring employee turnover in areas that are considered high risk. Finance, procurement, overseas offices can help determine whether ethical concerns are driving departures. And survey data on trust levels, which we measure that. Regular employee surveys on perception of leadership and the compliance program can offer a pulse on trust. And the key, Tom, is to go past the traditional engagement surveys and specifically ask questions related to ethical concerns and trust in compliance leadership. Because if you ask me how I perceive my leaders, how they are with regards to ethical concern, trust, compliance, then that data becomes very valuable. And if you're not willing to ask those questions, that in itself, I think, is a problem. Then there's another thing that, with regards to trust, what are you doing with the data? And when the data comes back to the people, then there's a higher degree of trust as well. Because if I know that you're willing to share what you get, good or bad, And when I see what you're doing with that data, hopefully that making the changes we need to make, then that trust goes up. And that's what we're looking for.
Sam, let me focus on number two because it involves so many different areas of, I'm going to say risk, but opportunities for risk management. So we've got retention rates, and you explained what a retention rate is. We've got a high risk area, and I'm going to perhaps throw in that a high risk area is any area, whether it's your sales, whether it's your services, whether it's your supply chain, that may put you at risk. But risk is not just risk of somebody doing something illegal or risk of somebody doing something unethical. It can be a risk of climate risk. Are you doing things on the beach and you get a hurricane? I lived on the Texas Gulf Coast for 40 years. Climate was a measured and recognized risk. So really strikes me here on this one, number two, Sam, that you have, once again, the opportunity that our earlier question sort of suggested, which does the culture audit allow you to look at risk in sort of multiple ways, because you're looking at retention risk. Now you're looking at high risk. Are we assessing how people are feeling about, or do they understand the risk of whatever it is they may be doing?
To me, what's important is there's a reason why in some organizations people stay and in other organizations people leave. And so when you look at your retention rates, then the question is, why is our retention rate what it is? So if the retention rate is high or the retention rate is low, either way, then we as leadership should be having a conversation. Why is our retention rate so high? We've had clients that we worked with, Tom, and they'll tell us that their turnover is a quarter of the turnover of their competitors. And that's pretty awesome. So why is that? Well, it's their turnover is low, their retention is high because of things that are happening inside the organization, things that are happening with the culture and various aspects. And now they know what they need to make sure that it's positive reinforcement that they can continue on that course. Or if retention is low, then great leadership is going to say, what's going on? Is this a people problem? Is this a climate issue? Is retention is low in this region versus this region? Does that have to do with the leadership that's in the region? Does that have to do with the tasks that are being performed? Is it inherently more dangerous to do what they're doing? Who knows what the situation is, but when you look at those retention rates, it gives you the information you need to ask the questions you need to ask, and then either reinforce good behavior or discover and eliminate bad behavior.
Sam, our next slide is the data-driven culture of compliance. And once again, what I really wanted to try to communicate in this webinar was the first word, and perhaps the first two words, data-driven. Could you explain how the culture audit really helps answer this DOJ question of data-driven?
Look, we've worked with a lot of leaders of organizations that saw their culture as being X, when in reality it was Y. They thought it was one thing, but in reality it was another. And if you're just going on anecdotal issues and you're not a culture expert, and even if you are, you're probably going to miss something. You're not going to know what's going on. And so if you have the data, if you have the facts, then it's not about your opinion, my opinion, Sue's opinion, Mary's opinion. It's about the reality. This is what our people think, feel, experience, and are sharing with us. And I don't know why people don't come and talk to me. My door's open. I have an open door policy. But maybe the people don't feel safe talking to me. Why is that? We need to figure that out. And so without the data that shows that they don't feel safe, without the data that shows why they don't feel safe, how can we solve this issue? So unless you're going to go to data, you're always going to be throwing darts and taking guesses. So your question, why is data-driven so important? Because it's always all about the data. And once we have the data, we can make good decisions.
Why is data so critical to transparency? And I know you've talked about sunshine is the best disinfectant, the light of day, but how about data in terms of fostering transparency?
And this is what I alluded to a minute ago. And I think this is the key. I've seen organizations where they'll do the culture audit, but then they don't share the results with their people. And so if you come to me and ask my opinion, and then you don't come back to me and say, okay, here's what we discovered, trust is out the window. Transparency is gone. Oh man, they must have found out something pretty bad because they're not sharing it with me. So it's important to share what the results are. And then second, it's important to share what's the plan. What are we going to do to move forward to deal with this? And it's okay if there's a problem as long as you recognize the problem and show how you're going to deal with the problem. But if you don't do that, then it becomes a cover-up. And who wants a cover-up, Tom?
And then once again, regularly reassess why is the culture audit, if not the best, certainly one of the best tools for regularly reassessing your metrics.
Because, first of all, we measure 15 key areas, so we know everything about your culture. It's quick, it's evasive, it's not difficult, and it's totally anonymous. So we find people feel safe. And if you set a tool up to where people feel safe giving their feedback, and you report out what that feedback is, and you show how you're using that information going forward, then people, you're positively reinforcing their involvement. If I don't feel like you're listening to me, I'm going to stop talking, whether it's words out of my mouth or filling out an assessment. You can over-assess your people in an organization. We have this assessment, we have this assessment, we have this assessment. They get worn out. And so you have to be careful how often you assess, what you assess, and what you do with that information so that you're giving the positive feedback so they know that this is serious and you're going to do something with it.
And then, and like I said, we've already had questions precisely on this topic, and you've answered several that I've posed to you, but why is it so critical to leverage multiple data sources and perhaps even things as disparate or not disparate as transaction data and cultural data?
It goes back to partly what we were talking about, but when you combine data from whistleblower systems and employee retention analytics and more nuanced views of whether employees trust leadership, and you take the data that we're getting through a well thought out, organized assessment, and you bring it together, then what happens is you have these intersection points that you and I can easily look at and go, there's an issue here. If you're having low reporting rate and high turnover, and that's going to show that there's an issue. And then when you have the culture audit, which is the data that you need to have, and you lay that with it, you go, okay, here's where the problem is. And it'll point out the people don't feel like the people say we have values, but the people don't feel like we're living the values. The people say that they can give us feedback, but the people don't believe we're doing anything with the feedback. And so when you bring all that data together, that's when you create a situation with this multiple data sources that positions you to get the best results.
Sam, we're going to move to a series of slides that are actually the numbers. And here I'd just ask you to go through and explain to us and our audience what these numbers are, what they mean in the context of the culture audit, and once again, what this will communicate to a regulator if you utilize these numbers. So could we maybe start with the know your numbers and what do they mean?
So this is an example of some of the information that's reported out in the culture audit. And so in this particular organization, this is a real organization, 71% of the people feel they are listened to. Now, you might say, wow, 71% feel they're listened to. That's pretty good. I think it's fair. I don't think it's great. So then the question is, how do we get that to 80%? How do we get above 80%? And then fine, put a task force on it. Make it someone's responsibility. We want 80% minimum of our people to feel that they're listened to. 84% feel they're supported by leadership. 81% feel supported by their coworkers. 78% feel comfortable expressing their opinion. So in this organization, there's a they feel they're getting support, but they are not necessarily listened to the degree that they could. And if you get that to rise, then everything else is going to go up. Let's look at the next set of numbers too, because I think this is interesting. Because what we're doing here is we're juxtaposing what we just saw. 71% feel they're listened to, 78% feel comfortable expressing their opinion. So people feel to a certain degree that they can express their opinion, but fewer people feel that they're listened to. And you say, that's only a 7% difference. Yeah. But the fact of the matter is, that shows a direction. And first of all, I want more than 80% to feel comfortable expressing their opinion. I'd like to get that to 90%, but it doesn't. The reason that's not at 90% is because only 71% feel they're listened to. I guarantee you, if your people feel listened to, then they're going to feel more engaged and more excited about expressing their opinion. So the question we would have to ask as leadership of this company, why don't they feel listened to? We need to know that. We need to figure that out, because there's something that we need to change. Now, here's the difference between leadership that totally gets it in building a culture of ethics and compliance. The leader that struggles building that culture says, there's something wrong with my people. We need to fix them. We need to train them. We need to educate them. And the leader that has the emotional intelligence to look at this and realize there's a problem and I know exactly where the problem is, that leader's going to say, oh my gosh, there's a problem with leadership. If our people don't feel listened to, we're doing something that's not right. And we need to figure out what we need to change. And it's not what you change how you do, it's what you change how you think. Because there's some way of thinking that's driving us to do something that creates a situation that only 71% feel listened to. That's the start of a conversation, a real conversation that can make a difference in the culture of an organization and ultimately will go straight to the bottom line.
Sam, our next two slides are going to pick up on a couple of specific words the Department of Justice has given us that are in the culture audit. And the first one is employee engagement. Can you explain what the score 3.76 is, what it means, and then how a company would use it? And once again, why it would be important for a regulator to hear and see this?
Our goal in this particular, our goal is that any of these scores, it's on a 5-point system. We want to see it at a 4 or better. And when I see something come through at a 3.76, my initial thought is we're kind of close. Everything, all the ingredients have been put into the bowl. We're ready to bake. What do we need to do to pop this up a little bit and get this into what we feel is an acceptable range? And so I think this company's on the right track, but there's something holding their people back from being engaged. So it really doesn't matter what the number is today, Tom, in my opinion. The question is, what are we willing to do about it? Because that 3.76 can become a 3.87 or a 3.99 or 4.05 if we take the right steps. So knowing where we are is important. We're in a positive place, but it could be better. And now we just need to work hard to make it better, which goes back to what I said before, not getting trapped into only working on the delivery of the products and services, not just working in the business, working on the business, working on the culture, and having people that understand this and making decisions and implementing on a daily basis.
And the next one is directly from, I shouldn't say, it's not directly from the Department of Justice, because you've been talking about this or long before the DOJ figured it out, but it's trust.
Yeah, trust is just so foundational. And this trust is not mandated. I touched on this before. Trust is not mandated. It's not mandated by anyone in a company. You can't do that. You can try. You can say you have to trust me. You should trust me. You better trust me. But the reality is, look at us, Tom. We've known each other for some time, and we collaborate on a lot of projects. And Why? Because we trust each other. I trust you that you've got my back. You trust me that I have your back. I'm always going to put you in the best possible light. You're always going to put me in the best possible light. We're going to help each other succeed. And when you have relationships like that, then good things happen. And when you trust leadership, when you truly trust leadership, then what happens is they trust you, that they're there for you, that they've got your back. And they're only going to make decisions that are in your best interest. You're only going to make decisions that are in their best interest. So high levels of trust drive high levels of ethical behavior.
And here are sort of my list, Sam, of some actual insights to improve your culture that we've talked about in this webinar, and I've tied it to the 2024 ECCP, which is that the ECCP mandates a data-driven approach. This is a huge change for compliance professionals. They didn't just mandate it in corporate culture, engagement, and trust. They mandated it across your compliance program. It's the 2024 update that included engagement, trust, and corporate culture. The Department of Justice is committed to data analytics. They hired from the corporate world the chief compliance officer with the top data analytics based compliance program. So they have taught themselves not only how to use data analytics, but equally from a regulatory perspective, they have taught themselves what a good data analytics program looks like and what a credible and powerful tool looks like. And so I think the culture audit offers the compliance professional as powerful a tool as there is to determine if the culture is one that has been created ethically and in compliance with integrity and will move forward. Number one. Number two is your compliance program, your culture, your engagement. These are not static terms, nor are they static concepts. They're dynamic. They always change. Just as your business change, your business risks change. If you don't think you have a business risk, do you think about inflation? You think about your customers? You think about your employees? You can name the risk, or you can name the variable. It's a risk. It's how you manage that risk. And what the DOJ has told us is they want to see that risk managed through data. And that's point three. It's ongoing monitoring and continuous improvement. And the culture audit does just that, because those scores Sam just gave of 3.87, 3.79, guess what? That's a baseline. And you can use that. You can reassess at a quarter. You can reassess at 6 months. You can reassess annually. But you can determine what has worked and what has not, and how you can continue to improve going forward. Sam, we've had another question come in, which says, I counsel my clients to utilize data, but the best way to build trust and relationship is to engage teams in a face-to-face manner, changing your training approach, getting away from simply PowerPoint slide decks, meet, engage, have that personal face time. And so that employees will know who they're talking to and be able to help, I don't want to say help you build a bridge of trust. Is that something that the culture audit would assess and maybe even point to? We need that. We need more face-to-face. We need that in person. Now that we're hopefully out of COVID and can do that, how do you kind of respond to something like that?
I think that's fantastic. If I'm working with a client or one of our advisors are working with a client, that's the sort of thing that we want to talk about doing. Culture is a relational issue. And you can't teach the organizational culture in a slide deck. You can't teach trust in a slide deck. This is how you trust people. This is how you work as teams. It needs to be belly to belly. It needs to be you and me together out there on the road, in the environment, on the floor. It's all about the relationship. It's about me getting to know you, you getting to know me. Oh my gosh, this guy's a great guy. I really like him. He's got my back. When you build that kind of relationship, then you create the environment where ethics and compliance is a non-issue from the standpoint of course, this is how we do it here. I asked the CEO of an organization once, it was a smaller organization, but nonetheless, I said, do you have an ethics and compliance officer? And he looked at me and he goes, he kind of shrugged, like, what do you mean? And then he said, well, all of us, because that's how they saw it. They saw ethics as the standard. They hired to that. They lived it. This is what everyone experienced. Why would anybody do something differently? But it always is going to come back to leadership taking that position. So, yeah, I mean, I love the question, comment. I think it's important. If you don't build a relationship, you'll never build accountability, you'll never build trust, and you'll never build your culture to be one that values ethics.
Sam, now I'd like to maybe move to forward steps. And this is something that you have talked about consistently. It's not just measuring, it's not getting the numbers, it's forward steps. So could we maybe end this webinar with your thoughts on moving forward?
Thank you, Tom, and I appreciate that. And this is really critical because it's really never about what you know, it's about what you do with what you know. So the question is, how do you create a stronger, more sustainable, high performance culture where ethics is high and we don't have problems with the DOJ. We are prepared should something go awry, but we don't have these problems. This is where it starts. First of all, it starts with the senior leader. It starts with the CEO, the president, whoever's at the top. It starts with them. This has to be something that they want, that they believe in, and that they will drive, not just support, they will drive, that the word culture will come out of their mouth on a regular basis. Because if I'm working hard to develop a culture in an organization and the person I report to makes one decision that goes against what we say we're all about, then that leader has undermined everything and people see what the leader's doing. All eyes go to the leader. So the leader needs to be on board. And once the leader's on board, then it's about the commitment. What's the commitment to our culture? We're going to have an amazing culture. We're going to measure. We're going to create a benchmark. And then we're going to commit time, energy, and resources to taking that initial benchmark, wherever it's at, and make it better. And we're going to continue to do this until the end of time. Leaders on board. Leader has people involved. You can never stop working on your culture. You use a tool like the culture audit to measure what's going on in the culture, and you're committed to taking that data, sharing the data with the people, getting the people involved, and then building a better organization. Because when you do that, you're going to always attract the best people. Companies with the best people will always outperform companies with the weaker people. It's just like sports. You want the 5-star recruits, and if you can keep them and keep them happy, engagement goes up, productivity goes up, profitability goes up, and you don't have a problem with the DOJ.
So I'm going to take care of a couple of administrative matters as we move towards the end. And if anyone else has questions, please feel free to put them in the chat function. This is our QR code. If you'd like more information on the culture audit, this will take you to the specific site for it. For those who would like copies of the slides, we're going to provide those in a follow-up email. Also, a short paper I've written on the topics that the Department of Justice has said they want to see around engagement, trust, and a culture of compliance, so that you'll have that as well. And this is Sam and myself's contact information. Hopefully within the next week or two, I'm writing a white paper on all of these, and we'll provide that to you in a second follow-up email as well. We hope that you have learned, or rather got some solid information out of this. I cannot tell you from the regulator's perspective how big a shift this is. And literally, this is the first time the DOJ said, we want to see your data analytics around culture, period. And those 4 questions I read a little bit earlier are as critical as any other part of what the DOJ is looking at. Please take these concepts into your program and how you might be able to answer them if you do get to that point. But as Sam said, we don't want to be anywhere near the DOJ. And so the culture audit and these answers to these questions would be a way to hopefully avoid that. Sam, you want to give any final thoughts?
Just first of all, thank you for everyone for being here. When we send out the email with follow-up information, there'll be a link to the video. Feel free to share this with others in your organization or another organization that it'd be valuable to. And then we would love to be able to talk to you about engaging with the culture audit in your organization. But whether you use our tool or whether you use another tool, be resolute and committed to understanding data, to obtaining the data and using the data, because when you do that, you'll be not only protecting yourself, but you'll be creating a better work environment for everyone in the organization. And I think everyone deserves that. And you're in a position to hopefully make that difference. So we want to be here as a resource and help you do just that.
I cannot emphasize what a big deal this is from the Department of Justice. It's a huge shift around culture, engagement, and trust. So thank you, everyone, until we get together next time.